everyone. I am Nellan Hunt here in New York. Thank you for tuning in to We News. We have a really exciting show for you today. With me this evening is Mr. J. Rakar, a patriot here in New York who constantly keeps his eye on what's going on in Sweet TNT, and Mr. Basdeo Pannday, the Honorable Basdeo Pannday, former leader of the UNC, former Prime Minister of the country of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pannday, Mr. Rakar, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Pannday, I'll ask you first, now that you are not actively involved in politics, what do you think is a leader or a former leader's role in the way the country operates? How civically active are you now in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, as you know, my daughter, Michaela, has formed a political party, and I am her chief advisor.
She was explaining to me a while back that you have been a constant source of information and inspiration to her, but she's also shared with me, technology being what it is, she's been teaching you WhatsApp and how to Zoom and all of these newfangled ways of staying in touch.
She's absolutely correct.
What are you doing these days in these years of relaxation and retirement?
Weeping for my country. That's one. Doing a little gardening, trying to complete my autobiography.
Wow.
And grieving as to what is happening in my country.
How do you think you can get involved, or are you involved on any level?
Well, the way I intend to, well, what I intend to do is to assist my daughter in trying to change the political atmosphere, in trying to introduce a new dimension into the politics. With what little experience I have, I try to pass it on to her.
Mr. Pannday, you're being very humble when you say what little experience you have.
Well, it's only 40 years, you know.
Only 40 years. How have you watched as politics have changed? What is your opinion the way politics have changed? Not even just in Trinidad and Tobago, but globally, politics have changed so much.
Right. First of all, I'm interested more in Trinidad and Tobago, and the politics in Trinidad and Tobago has changed for the worse.
How so?
I think racism has intensified, and the politically racial divide is preventing the country from moving forward. In fact, I think we are deteriorating very fast.
What is the one thing you think that could be changed effectively and efficiently to help create a better political environment and atmosphere?
The only answer is constitutional reform. The present constitution fosters and encourages and entrenches voting along racial lines. Trinidad is peculiar in not only does it have two major races, ethnicities, or what have you, but it is divided also regionally.
Yes.
That is one party in the north, one in the south. And those in the south are people of East Indian descent. Those in the north, people of Afro-Trinidadian descent. And they vote along racial lines without reason, without rhyme or reason. And if that is the case, then the government only has to rely on racial appeal and not on performance in order to be returned to office. Unless that is broken, I think Trinidad will continue to deteriorate politically and otherwise.
When you talk about constitutional reform, explain to the lay person how the Constitution operates with regard to election.
Okay, the Constitution is based on a first past the post single member constituency. That means the country is divided into constituencies. But
Right.
those in the south are what you may call Indian constituencies, and those in the north and south, Afro constituencies, and they vote like that. Now, as long as you have first past the post in a system like that, the racial voting is going to continue. What you need to do is to have a parliament elected on the basis of proportional representation, so that people go into parliament representing interests, economic interests, as opposed to racial cleavages. That, I think, is the answer. And that can be only done by proportional representation, where, do you know something? Less than 50% of the electorate of Trinidad and Tobago participate in the elections. It means that there are 50% of the people outside there who don't participate because of the political system. It's no use. They know nothing is going to change. If you can mobilize that 50% of the people into participating in the election on the basis of proportional election representation, what you're going to have is a parliament represented by several economic interest groups as opposed to racial groups. And so the country's thinking is about its economic and social advancement as opposed to its racial division.
Constitutionally, we would what one would describe as a young country. And I'll ask you this, Mr. Raka, do you think that given our political immaturity, when we look at how politics operate in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's only because of our experiences, do you think it is possible that we are now entering the arc of this changing? Or is it possible that we need to be more aggressive in how we change it, as Mr. Pannday said, due to constitutional reform?
The arc is there. However, if you look at what took place in the 2010 election with Mrs. Basdeo, at that time she went in and she had Maganda Daga, she had all the black folks who incorporated their strength and helped her. And she did gain and she won that election. However, in the second time she went in, she said she's not going with those people. She's not going with anyone. As if the blacks are not part of this country or if they are not part of this political process. And because she did what she did, she lost the election. So now at this point in time, as Mr. Pannday said, if we do not find common grounds where we can merge the people together, bring in the points and the economic strength for the blacks as the Indian, we will definitely get somewhere. But for donkey years, we have been, like Guyana, separated from getting together. And while we continue on that foothold, we are going to be a divided country. Take, for example, we have a great lady, Kamala Harris, who comes from Indian descent, marries a black father from Jamaica. She merges and makes a big impact in bringing people together. So I don't see why Trinidad cannot, by this day, understand that they are blacks and they are Indians. And we have respect those people and they will respect us. But if you keep standing on the line of division, we are not going. And if she goes back again with the same attitude, we're going to be in opposition for the longest time in our history.
We're going to take a quick break, gentlemen. We'll be right back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching Nell & Hunt for We News here in New York. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I am Nell & Hunt in New York for We News. Thank you for tuning in. We're speaking with Jay Raka, a very
leader of the diaspora,
patriot, and Mr. Basdeo Pannday, former politician, now private citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Mr. Raka, you said something very interesting when you talked about people bringing people along during politicking and elections and campaigning, and then falling away from the optic of having a concerned inclusion. How important is inclusion and diversity in Trinidad and Tobago to its future in politics?
It's absolutely, because you look at us in America, we go to anywhere and we say a black man, he's like a brother to us. I was in the service. 90% of my brothers were all blacks. I in the foxhole with a black man. I went to Montgomery with a black guy. I understand the blackish. You have to learn to understand and respect those people. Because when it comes time in danger, the same blood they're going to inject for me from a black man to save my life. How can we not understand that we are now in this age, in this era, that Trinidad is composed of two sections, the blacks, Africans, and the Indians. And until this day, they can't get together. We are still going to be laboring for segregation instead of coming together and working towards a common goal. I believe Pannday knows it. When he was in power, they blame him because he was too much blackish, that he was going and doing too much good. But that was the right thing to do, to show that I'm equally representing those people as I am equally representing the people on the Caroni heartland. So it has to come back to a point where we can get together and share the power and look for the common good.
Mr. Pannday, when you talk about proportional representation and you talk about constitutional reform, explain to the general public what is the process of constitutional reform and how does that come about? One of the things that was very interesting that Michaela, your daughter, had spoken to me about is how, and we both agreed, people need to understand that governments do not change within an election year. They need to understand the value and the importance of local election and having an idea of speaking to their representative, their councilman. Those are the people that they need to reach out to catapult the change that is necessary. Mr. Pannday?
The tragedy in Trinidad and Tobago is that the constitution can only be changed within the present constitution. That is to say, in order to change the constitution, you must have a 2/3 majority of the members of the House. And only 3 persons had that. Dr. Eric Williams, A.N.R. Robinson, and Kamla Prasad Bisesha. And neither of them wanted change because they all wanted to perpetuate the present system. It's easy to get into power that way. You don't have to work. You don't have to do anything. You just have to preach race come the election, and people are going to vote accordingly. We've been doing the same thing for almost 50 years and expecting different results. It is said that that is the first sign of madness.
Repeating an effort, expecting a different result each time. I understand what you're saying.
Doing the same thing and expecting different results. First sign of madness.
I have a question for you, Mr. Pannday.
Sure.
Mr. Rowley has been doing his 2nd term. Our constitution doesn't have term limits.
No, it does not.
So that means that he may have a chance to go in if he succeeds again for a 3rd term.
If he wins the election, yes, sir, by all means.
So why, I don't understand why we can't come together and change. There are a whole lot of things in that constitution need to be changed.
You just answered it. I just answered it by saying those who can change it don't want it changed.
For convenience.
You understand, Mr. Raka, what Mr. Pannday has said is the ruling government needs to say there are things that need to, and the opposition needs to decide we need to change these things. What does it benefit the opposition not pursue constitutional reform?
Because all they have to do is to preach this and they'll get a few seats in the parliament, and because of the demographic distribution of the population, remain in the opposition forever. The only time, I think the only time the opposition actually won more seats than the PNM was when I was in office, I think in 1995. And that's because I had a different trajectory. I was with the trade union movement, struggling with workers and so on, and didn't have that kind of image that the opposition had, which was an Indian image, but rather someone struggling for the workers, black, white, blue, cream, it didn't matter what color they were. And I think that did it. Other than that, I don't think the present opposition cares about going back into parliament. I think they just enjoy being in the opposition. To say that we will fight alone and we will lose alone is to condemn oneself to being in the opposition all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see, the question of politics in Trinidad is who have the power?
Right.
Is a we time now syndrome. And it hasn't, unless we get away from that, we are not going to progress as a nation. We have got to have a parliament, for example. We don't have a democracy in Trinidad, you know. In a democracy, it is said that the people control the government.
Yes.
Who are the people? The people are those who are elected by the electorate, okay? But in Trinidad, the government forms the majority of the parliament, of the members of parliament. So this is not the people controlling the government, but the government controlling the people. That is not democracy. The government, for example, I tell you, it is so different from the American system. The government goes into office and it has a budget. Mm-hmm. The government, that is the majority party, prepares the budget, decides how much it's going to spend, and come to parliament for approval. But in coming to parliament for approval, they come to themselves because they have the majority.
Absolutely.
So they come to the, how can you prevent, what is the bane of Trinidad and Tobago? Corruption, waste, and mismanagement. That is our problem. And it's not going to be solved under the present political system.
We're going to take a quick break, gentlemen. When we come back, I'd like to touch on our political systems and how can we overhaul them. We'll be right back, everyone. You're watching We News. I'm Nellan Hunt here in New York. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to We News. I'm Nellan Hunt in New York. I'm speaking today with Jay Rakar and Basdeo Pannday, and we're basically looking at, you know, what's working and what isn't working. One of the things Mr. Pannday has talked about repeatedly is constitutional reform, changing the way we look at voting, changing the way the power is distributed. Mr. Pannday, you talked about the fact that we need to have the people control the government. How does the man in the street get empowered enough to say, Mr. Pannday, you've been representing Mayaro for all these years, and we've been asking for this bridge to be fixed. We think we need to put somebody else in who will do it on a local government issue, because I think local government is overlooked so much.
Local government takes the same pattern as the national government, based on race. They don't have to perform, they just have to preach race come the elections, whether it's local government elections or national elections, and go back into office.
There's a phrase that is used ever so often when international organizations have to evaluate countries' political systems. And it's one that they hesitantly use, but they say sometimes maybe people have the government they deserve. And I know that that's a broad sweeping phrase to introduce, but do you think that we need to understand more how government works before we say, we'll just put this person there because of how they look? When do we say we need results?
I agree with you totally. It is important that people know how the government works. And if they know how the government works, they may have a reason to change it. But in Trinidad and Tobago, what is important is not how you run the government, is who runs the government, which race runs the government. So they're not thinking outside the box at all. Every time about it, although I must confess that there is a large majority of people in the country, electorate, and they don't vote during the elections because they are fed up with both sides.
Yeah.
The tragedy is, how do you mobilize them? That is what I think I did when to become prime minister, was to mobilize the population, mobilize them across racial lines. And in fact, when we got into office, we began doing things to indicate that we were not going to be partial, that we were going to treat people equally. And it was very successful. As a matter of fact, when Ramesh Maharaj and Trevor Sudama and Ralph Maharaj went over with the PNM and brought the government down, couldn't run the government, and I called a by-election. In that by-election, we got 18 seats and the PNM got 18 seats, but we got more votes than them. We had a majority of votes.
Right.
And A.N.R. Robinson appointed Manning. And that was it.
Yeah.
So we
said it was moral values.
Moral and spiritual values.
Moral and spiritual values.
From a person who had no morals and very little spiritual values.
Absolutely. And then I led, back here in New York, when he came up here, we had a group of the boys. We went and placarded him at the hotel that he stayed in when he couldn't understand that 18 and 18 has an incumbent and they should have gone back for an election.
Of course. That is the corruption of the system, where Robinson, because he was a political opponent at mine at one time, and he was a former PNM, gave Manning the prime ministership on the basis of moral and spiritual values. I don't know who's moral and who's spiritual values.
Mr. Pannday, one final question. This has been so interesting. Do you think we should have term limitations for leaders?
It depends upon the kind of system that you have. In the political system that you have in the United States, it's probably important. But I do not see a necessity for it. If someone is a good government, a good prime minister, why shouldn't they be in office?
Yeah.
Why put a limit to a good government in office?
Right.
So you can bring in a bad one?
But one question.
Interesting point.
One question upon that same subject. We have in the United States term limits for Congress people. They are due for midterm election. Every 2 years, we can kick them out or we can replace them. Yes, we don't wait 5 years or 4 years before we kick that guy out. He has been condemned. He has been contaminated. In 2 years, there are midterm election, which is something, we don't take the government out. We take out only that specific bad apple that we have been trying to contaminate the rest. These are things, and we don't have in our country what we call primaries. You can put any Tom, Dick, and Harry anyway from here to Tabaquite, and everybody votes for him. That is not something I believe should be done. If it's the voice of the people, and if it's the will of the people, then we should give the people the right to determine who is going to be my representative, then leaving the leader putting somebody to be my representative.
Do you remember Dr. Eric Williams saying, if I put a tie on a crapo,
he'll win.
People will vote for him. Because they're not going to vote for the candidate on the basis of merit. They're going to vote on the basis of race. And that is what is killing Trinidad.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am a Republican who have never voted for Mr. Trump because of moral and spiritual values he didn't inherit. And I stood to this day to say that when a man is bad, I don't care about the party. I care about the person who's going to represent me. And we should change that in Trinidad.
because you are not voting on racial lines.
Absolutely.
You are voting on a meritocracy.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen,
That is
thank
what
you so very much. Sorry to cut you off, Mr. Raka. Thank you so very much. This has been a really, really interesting conversation, and one that I hope sparks a national conversation that can take place with people, where we can really sit back, as you said, Mr. Pannday, as you just said, a meritocracy. On behalf of everyone here at We News, I'd like to say thank you so much for tuning in, Mr. Raka, Mr. Pannday. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a good day.